How I got involved in it was I see all these people driving new cars and all these big wads of money, and I were working for maybe $300 a week, barely paid the rent and bought groceries, and I got to noticing 15, 16-year-old kids walking around with $3,000 or $4,000 in their pocket all the time, and I kind of figured that if they can do it, I can do it.
According to the House Narcotics Committee, marijuana production in this country now reaps an estimated $52 billion, a cash crop that exceeds even corn. In Indiana, it's estimated that marijuana has surpassed wheat as the state's third biggest money-making crop. In fact, state police officials report that they've destroyed more than $1 billion worth of marijuana in 1984 alone. To many people, these figures are hard to believe, because while cornfields can be found just about anywhere in the state, many people simply never see signs of marijuana growth at all. They find it hard to believe that the problem is really very serious. Well, for starters, marijuana growth is always well disguised, and most of all, it simply doesn't take many plants to make up an expensive crop. The lowest grade Indiana marijuana, which grows wild in many parts of the state, can sell for about $10 to $100 a pound. A pound of well-cultivated hybrid pot can go for as much as $1,000. And when each plant can yield as much as a pound of leaves and buds, it doesn't take much to push the value of a crop well into the thousands. Marijuana growth is present in all areas of the state, but it can be easily classified into three different categories. The first group includes all of the marijuana that grows wild throughout Indiana. The second group is made up of cultivated marijuana that is planted among crops or disguised in other ways. Marijuana grown indoors or in greenhouses makes up the third group. Each of these three categories can be found throughout Indiana, yet each is more prevalent in certain geographical areas. The first group of marijuana is often called ditchweed because it grows readily in ditches and along roadsides. It's the lowest grade of Indiana pot, with a potency well below that of imported or sinsemilla marijuana. Ditchweed is found predominantly in northern Indiana, where it's grown wild on many farms for the last 40 years. You see, during World War II, fibers from the hemp plant were used to make rope. When hemp supplies were cut off by fighting in the Pacific, an effort was made to grow the source of hemp, or common marijuana, here in this country. And now, decades later, the plants are still around and harvested not for making of rope, but for selling for profit to drug dealers. Northern Indiana has developed quite a reputation for its wild marijuana, and it attracts would-be harvesters from as far away as Alaska and New York. State police investigators have even uncovered maps that pinpoint choice spots for picking the wild marijuana. This former dealer turned informant, who we'll call Joe, helped convict more than 80 people in northern Indiana on drug charges. He confirms the fact that Indiana's reputation for wild marijuana is known in drug circles throughout the United States. In fact, he speaks of an informal motel system that is set up to house out-of-town harvesters.
There's a lot of people in this state that just take money for letting people come to their house and stay and work. All they do is stay at these people's house. They pay them, $200, $300 a week, maybe more, and they just stay there and they go out at work at night until they get them up a load, and then they take it back to Florida. This way the people aren't involved in anything. They just simply say, the guy stays at my house, that's all.
On this farm in Stark County, owned by farmer Jerry Gums, illegal marijuana harvesters had become a problem. Gums said he found cattle gates left open and crops trampled by trespassers looking for wild marijuana on his land. So midway through the summer, when the pot plants along his crops and irrigation ditches reached a height of 4 to 6 feet, Gums called his local representative of the Indiana Farm Bureau. Prior to his call in Indianapolis, Indiana Farm Bureau President Marion Stackhouse and Indiana State Police Superintendent John Shettle had just co-signed an agreement to begin a statewide marijuana eradication program for farmers. So when Gumbs called, the groundwork had been laid, and the Indiana State Police and the Farm Bureau began the process which eventually destroyed 9 linear miles of wild marijuana on the Gumbs farm. Since this was the first eradication process of the new cooperative agreement, the event attracted news media from as far away as Indianapolis and Chicago, and telephone inquiries from TV networks in New York. The stage was set, and Indiana's marijuana eradication program was off and rolling. On the other side of the fence, those involved with the illegal harvest of the ditchweed were getting a little concerned about the new crackdown.
For one thing, it makes the people a lot more nervous. They don't do as much as they would do because of the helicopter situation and the planes. Planes are flying, they're flying low and they're watching, and it makes people nervous. They get real nervous and they pass up a lot of things that they would do otherwise.
Back on the farm, the eradication process went smoothly. Tractors moved along ditch banks and crop boundaries, while farmhands sprayed the marijuana plants with a common farm herbicide. The tractors covered many miles that day. Above them, in state police helicopters, news cameramen captured the work on videotape, then traveled many miles themselves to return to their TV stations. Stories were seen in a number of Indiana communities that night, and citizens were shown the benefits of reporting wild marijuana growth. What are those benefits? Well, let's talk a bit about Indiana's marijuana and about its effects on everyone in the state. The word marijuana is derived from the Mexican or the Central American word marihuango, a term meaning any intoxicating substance. We define it to mean the dried particles of leaves, stems, flowers, and seeds of the hemp plant, or cannabis sativa. Marijuana owes its psychoactive properties to a chemical called delta-9 THC. While this is found in all marijuana, levels may vary widely with different types of the plant. Marijuana from Colombia currently accounts for about 60% of all the marijuana used in the United States. Its delta-9 THC concentration has been traditionally high, averaging about 3.5%. High, fibrous ditchweed, like that found growing wild on the Gumbs farm, has a much lower potency. Test reports from the State Police Laboratory show that marijuana to have a delta-9 THC content of only 0.06% to 0.17%. So why is this ditchweed so popular with illegal harvesters? Only one word is needed to answer that question.
Money. It makes people do a lot of strange things. So it's hard to turn down that big buck. Like I say, even me, and fairly new in the business, if I could do $127,000 in the first year I was ever in the business, it would just be shocking to even think about the people that have been established for years in the business. Part of the farms and everything else around it are bought with marijuana money. The businesses, they're financed with it. The new automobiles, it would be a lot different if the market wasn't good for marijuana. There wouldn't be half as many rich people.
Trial testimony from one of the cases in which Joe was involved revealed that one northern Indiana pot harvester grossed $900,000 in a single season. Another picker recalled a 21-hour harvest that yielded more than 1,000 pounds and about $50,000. Joe estimates that nearly 25% of all the people in the northern Indiana area where he used to operate are somehow involved in the process of picking, storing, and selling marijuana. One of the people Joe's testimony helped to convict, in fact, was a county councilman who was found burying hundreds of pounds of pot in his backyard. Joe says that while this business attracts people of all ages, it especially affects young people.
The kids. Basically, I've saw 13, 14-year-old kids, 15-year-old kids with thousands of dollars in their pocket, you know. They won't work, they won't go to school, they get this money, you know. They buy cars, they buy beer, and they spend it until it's all gone, and then they go back out and pick some more marijuana. On the one occasion that we went to the trailer to make a buy, they had their daughter sitting on the floor, and they had a couple big bags of marijuana poured out as she was manicuring it with a pair of scissors.
How old was she?
I don't think the kid must have been 7, 8, 9 or 7, 8, something like that. I don't know exact age, but I would say probably that, maybe 9 or something like that. And she was just working real hard at it, you know, because apparently Mommy said, do it, you know, help me get this up.
As we established earlier, Indiana ditchweed is very low in levels of delta-9 THC. In fact, NORML, the National Organization for the Reform of Marijuana Laws, labels the ditchweed inferior. So how are all these folks making so much money? Well, big drug dealers, those who deal with thousands of pounds of marijuana, have become very interested in Indiana ditchweed. For as little as $10 a pound, dealers can buy up literally tons of Indiana pot and then use it to cut higher quality Colombian. With this process, which can be likened to a bartender watering down a drink, dealers can demand $800 to $1,000 for a pound of Colombian pot that is frequently 1/3 to 1/2 Indiana ditchweed. While dealers have been found to come from all areas of the United States and Canada, Joe says the largest ones are from the Southeast.
A lot of them are from Florida. Of course, there's some that come from Georgia, too, and get it. They come to get it. They bring tractor trailers to get it. You know, bring a car or a pickup truck or a camper. They like to get 5,000 pounds or more at a time.
While ditchweed grows predominantly in northern Indiana, southern Indiana has its own type of marijuana growth. Planted or cultivated marijuana fields are found in many areas of southern Indiana, where the rolling hills and fields provide more cover than the flat farmland in central and northern Indiana. What's more, as we mentioned earlier, northern Indiana has a reputation for its wild marijuana and attracts would-be harvesters from all over the United States. Those people who deliberately plant and cultivate fields of marijuana don't want strangers stumbling upon their crops. So for them, southern Indiana is the perfect area. From the air as well as from the ground, this looks like a normal field of corn. And it is, until you reach a certain point, a point nearly 2 miles from the nearest road, far back into the hills that surround the crop. At this point, right about here, this normal field of corn turns into a field of corn mixed with marijuana. Impossible to detect from the air, and virtually inaccessible from the ground, this field was a nearly perfect way to grow a large quantity of marijuana. But an informant tipped off the Jackson County Sheriff's Office, and after an extensive search through some rugged country, authorities discovered the field. Apparently, they surprised the caretakers or guards of the crop, as is evident from this hastily abandoned meal at a camp set up adjacent to the field. The camp was well camouflaged and contained enough food and fresh water for an extended stay. Shotgun shells found at the campsite indicated that the guards were very serious about protecting their field. From this lookout station, sentries had an unobscured view of the entire crop of corn and marijuana. The owner of the property was soon located, and an agreement was made to eradicate the marijuana. Department of Transportation tractors were called in, and they spent the entire day mowing the 40-acre area of cornfield that contained the marijuana. The value of the corn that was destroyed that day was estimated at $10,000. The value of the marijuana? About $50 million. In Lafayette, Indiana, another example of cultivated marijuana. When a landowner became overly strict about keeping people away from his land, conservation officers suspected game violations. A state police helicopter flew over the area, and the pilot spotted a nearly camouflaged field of marijuana. The normal eradication process followed, this time involving both troopers and conservation officers. Representatives of several area news services were on hand to view the proceedings. This story by WLFI news reporter Mike Pickett gives an example of how the news media helped to inform Indiana citizens about what was being done to solve the state's extensive marijuana problem.
State police and conservation officers are zeroing in on a major marijuana growing operation, apparently centering in Carroll County. Circumstances may never lead to an arrest, but 8 plots have been destroyed. Last night's the largest and most intricate. The marijuana plant was hidden by a cornfield and woods along the Wabash River north of Delphi. State Trooper Jay Janke says it's quality stuff.
Well, you can see by just the way the plant is looking that it's an awful healthy looking plant, and that it's not your run-of-the-mill Indiana ditchweed. It's been well taken care of, well cultivated, well fertilized, and we have evidence that they've had watering devices hooked up to utilize spring coming out of the side of the hill, and they also utilized fertilizer and herbicide to keep the bugs off and to make sure that it was going to be a very healthy plot and healthy adventure.
It was discovered only by air surveillance. An attempt was being made to rig up a camouflage net to hide the plants. Another day or so and it may never have been spotted. Troopers and conservation officers cut down more than 1,200 stalks, carted it off to the West Lafayette Post, and set it afire. Working for you in Carroll County, Mike Pickett, News Service 18.
Marijuana can be found in small plots and gardens throughout the state. While these are often difficult to discover, the state police received a number of tips that led to hundreds of investigations. Many small plots were discovered by the pilots of the State Police Air Section. To escape the eye in the sky, more serious growers often move their plants indoors, into homes, barns, or greenhouses. This also allows closer care of the plants, and it's from this growth category that most of the very high-potency marijuana comes. For example, in Owen County, a local pilot spotted this group of temporary greenhouses. He relayed information about his sighting to the state police, and a helicopter was sent to confirm his report. When the greenhouses were spotted, the local prosecutor was notified, and troopers went in for a look. This barn was virtually empty except for a small living area and another room used for drying the few pot plants that had already been harvested. Later in the year, when more of the plants had matured and were ready for picking, this barn probably would have served as a place to sweat the marijuana. By hanging it upside down after it's picked, growers hope to build up levels of delta-9 THC and moisture in the plant's buds and leaves.
Well, to sweat it, you have to keep it somewhere where it gets hot moisture, where it more or less cooks the grass. And it cooks it, it takes the sap out, and it turns it the color brown. You can leave it in bags, or you can build a sweat box. You can lay it out in plastic bags and let the sun hit it. If it's a real hot day, it sweats real good like that. If it's a cold day, there's no sun, it's windy, you know, it just won't sweat.
Joe says this sweating process not only increases the potency of the marijuana, but also helps to change its greenish color to a browner shade that's more characteristic of Colombian pot. Color is an important selling point of marijuana, and when necessary, buds are even dyed. Very close to the barn was this small makeshift greenhouse. Lifting the plastic covering reveals several high-grade plants. A humidifier helped to keep the plants healthy. These dogs were undoubtedly present to dissuade trespassers from straying too close. They were, fortunately, friendly. About a half a mile back into the woods that surrounded the barn was a small clearing. Hidden beneath the tall trees was this house and 2 small sheds used to store gardening tools and supplies. From this shed, a hose and power cable ran down into the woods. Not surprisingly, these lines led right to the group of greenhouses. This drum was used as an intermediate step in the water supply. When full, gravity would make the water flow through the hose, down the hill, and into the greenhouses. Inside the greenhouses revealed a makeshift masterpiece. 2x4s and PVC tubing were used to build the structure. A giant piece of clear plastic formed the roof. Ventilation fans and heaters kept the plants at a comfortable temperature. Most of these plants were of the sinsemilla variety, a seedless hybrid in which the flowering tops of the female plant are left unpollinated. Marijuana from these plants is typically very potent, having a delta-9 THC content as high as 5%. And these plants certainly looked healthy. Many, like this one, were nearly 12 feet tall. Each plant was very bushy. Each may have yielded as much as $1,000 worth of marijuana. Authorities estimated the value of all the plants at the greenhouses at more than $60,000. In summary, this problem, that may have been underestimated for so many years, seems to be finally receiving its due attention. Private citizens as well as corporations are joining with law enforcement officials to combat the increase of marijuana growth. Figures from Washington indicate that Indiana was responsible for about half of all the marijuana eradicated in this country in 1984. The Indiana State Police estimate that they destroyed more marijuana in 1984 than in the preceding 10 years combined. It appears the program is working. The word from the fields indicates that harvesting efforts have been marginally decreased from the busy pace of past years. Joe reports that dealers and harvesters are looking to states like Iowa and Nebraska as the next big marijuana frontier. He says Indiana may act as a middleman or a storage area of the out-of-state pot, but it's likely that the cultivating and harvesting of Indiana marijuana will drop substantially if eradication efforts continue. As for Joe, well, he's looking to other states himself. Not really for new places to pick marijuana, but simply for a new place to live. You see, while trading incriminating testimony for his freedom, Joe made plenty of enemies. He's even heard of rumors of a $50,000 reward on his head. So he'll soon be heading for another area of the country, a place far away. But as a lingering drawback of the business in which he was once involved, Joe does admit one thing. No matter where he goes, he'll never get away quite far enough.